We're going to discuss 1201 in detail in class. This part is about the exemption process for individual acts of circumvention. You don't have to know the details, but you do have to know where to look and what kinds of arguments are relevant. Along with the statutory exceptions discussed in the casebook, the Library of Congress can grant exceptions every 3 years for users adversely affected by 1201 A1A in their ability to make non-infringing uses of a particular class of works. The exemption process is an example of turning copyright into more of an administrative regime. The most recent round of exemptions was in 2024 and looks pretty similar to previous rounds. One question is whether an administrative body is better than a statute for issues like anti-circumvention exemptions. Is it better to have the Copyright Office revisiting the question every 3 years or to have it codified in the statute? Maybe if we had only the statute, Congress would have drafted with greater care. Instead, it counted on the Copyright Office to deal with any overbreadth, but it also denied the office power to make exemptions to any of the device bans. So in theory, if you have an exemption, you still have to create your own circumvention device, and most people aren't capable of doing that. The standard for granting an exemption requires the Copyright Office to find that 1201 has had a substantial adverse effect on non-infringing uses. Until 2006, the Library of Congress had taken the position that exemptions couldn't be defined by a class of users or by an intended use, e.g. fair use, only by a class of works for which circumvention would be authorized. However, the use of film professors of short clips for use in teaching was so obviously fair, and prohibiting it could raise First Amendment issues. So the librarian changed its position and started defining exceptions by classes of users and uses, not just classes of works. The film professor's use of clips in class to make their teaching better was a fair use that the Ramirez court said in dicta was okay to ban. What made a difference was that the film professors actually made the evidentiary showing in front of the Copyright Office that they couldn't practically use the alternatives that the Second Circuit had hypothesized. Videotapes were disappearing. Attempts to capture film by copying it didn't work very well for various physics reasons. And there was suddenly a bunch of exclusive DVD content. So the only way to teach about it was to circumvent. So in 2006, they got the DVD exemption. The next exemptions were granted in 2010. And you may notice that 2010 is not 3 years after 2006. This is where I came in. The Copyright Office dithered throughout 2009, but belatedly agreed we'd made our case for allowing circumvention for the purposes of creating non-commercial remix video. And of course, nobody knows about 1201, so everyone who wants to do non-commercial remix, in fact, pretty much everyone, except for a few institutions, just finds the footage one way or the other. So over time, the exemptions get more prolix. One thing you need to figure out under this version of the exemption, for example, when will a person have reasonable grounds for believing that circumvention is necessary? And indeed, 3 rounds later, the exemptions have gotten much more complicated for little to no payoff. Documentary filmmakers get an exemption, but not fictional filmmakers. There will be no using circumvention to create the equivalent of today's Forrest Gump. We added Blu-ray and online services. That's an important expansion, especially as the DVD itself starts to disappear, or if you want to make a comment about a recently aired episode on streaming where there's no DVD yet, maybe not ever. Also, non-commercial videos and nonfiction multimedia ebooks offering film analysis, and college and faculty and students. Now, these people, you can see there's actually a distinction between using screen capture technology and using something else. Since nobody participated from the tech side of this, we don't really know what the difference is, but you're allowed to rely on somebody's representation that they're making screen capture technology instead of some other kind of technology. And we can talk about why that might matter in class. And then massive open online course faculty and lower grade teachers with the same structure as for colleges. And then lower grade students in media literacy programs, but only for screen capture technology. They no longer trust people to decide for themselves that circumvention is reasonably necessary. The Copyright Office seems to think its job is to narrow exemptions proposed by the parties and add extra restrictions so basically they only apply in the narrowest possible situation. We also have separate exemptions for the blind and print disabled and for those who serve them. We also have unlocking exemptions to allow computers to connect to different networks. Here, copyright is being used to serve a non-copyright purpose to control use of a device on a particular network. It's like having a lamp that will only plug in to one provider's electrical system, even though the device is capable of running anywhere if it doesn't have the lockdown software installed. When the office failed to approve this exception in 2012, Congress acted to reinstate it, although only temporarily. The office has gotten the message, though, and continues to grant the unlocking exemption again and again. Also, jailbreaking, which is you can unlock your phones and TVs to allow them to run unapproved programs, but only for TVs and phones, not game systems. By 2018, the office was so exhausted that it set up an expedited renewal process for existing exemptions. So if you submit a statement that things haven't changed, the office can take that as substantial evidence of continuing need for the exemption, and opponents will need to make a substantial opposition to show that something has changed. None of us is entirely sure this complies with the APA, which the process is supposed to follow, but we're all exhausted too. The office renewed most of the existing exemptions, including their overcomplicated language. This is probably what we can expect going forward. A key lesson is that the Copyright Office does not try and figure out a way that 1201 doesn't apply to ordinary consumer products that happen to have computer programs in them. The Copyright Office accepts that 1201 covers them and that an exemption is necessary if you want to tinker with or resell your device that has a computer program in it without permission. As we'll see in class, by contrast, courts often try and avoid that conclusion for ordinary consumer products. But the Copyright Office continues. There's an exemption for vehicles. This is the John Deere problem. So John Deere's put software on its tractors to prevent independent repair shops from making repairs, making the maintenance much more expensive and providing it a monopoly that it probably shouldn't have. So you have an exemption for that. There's an exemption for some security research, not just any security research, consumer devices like voting machines, vehicles, and medical devices. And one thing to note here is that restricting it to specific devices ensures that if there's a newly emerging problem, it can't be addressed legally for at least 3 years. Also, there's supposed to be a security research exemption in the statute already, but it's written so narrowly that it's useless. So they need this one. We have 3D printers. Same thing as unlocking and jailbreaking, but for physical media, apparently feedstock can be locked out if you don't have the right code. And medical device data. Some people wear glucose monitors that send information back to the manufacturer. They want to hack it so they can get the information themselves and track their own glucose. This apparently requires an exemption. And again, recall that all these exemptions are only for A1A, the actual circumvention. The trafficking provisions remain in place. With the medical device exemption, it just so happened that one programmer who had a glucose monitor implanted wrote the relevant decryption software. The exemption does not allow him to disseminate it to other patients, although, of course, you can find the software if you try. This is an open secret at the hearings. We all just agree not to talk about the fact that the device ban simply doesn't work and that its violation would be necessary for almost anyone to take advantage of the granted exemptions for individual acts of circumvention. A certain amount of cynicism is perhaps necessary to participate. In 2025, the district court upheld this exemption, the medical device exemption, against an Administrative Procedure Act challenge by medical device makers, finding that the librarian reasonably concluded that these uses didn't harm the copyright market for medical device software. There's no market for such software independent of the devices, and circumvention doesn't actually let you make copies. It just lets you use the devices in different ways. So that's it, and we'll talk about it in class.